Hey everyone, it's Tyler with the Museum of the American Revolution. I'm back with another cooking demonstration, part of our Living History at Home series, and today I was inspired by an object in the museum's collection. I bet my friend Kevin can show it to you right now. There it is. It's a cookie board, a piece of wood carved with designs, on one side a woman in a dress, and on the other side a potted flower, and it was used by a man named Christopher Ludwig. He embossed cookies and cakes with it, kind of like a cookie cutter but for three-dimensional designs. Ludwig arrived in Philadelphia from Germany in 1754, and he opened a popular bakery just a couple blocks from where the museum is today. During the Revolutionary War, he became the superintendent of bakers for the Continental Army, so he was in charge of making the soft bread and the hard bread that fed the soldiers. This cookie board was donated to the Valley Forge Historical Society, the predecessor of the Museum of the American Revolution, in the 1950s by Ludwig's descendants. There's even a children's book about Ludwig called Gingerbread for Liberty that you can read. And I wanted to use that story and our cookie board as inspiration to make gingerbread using ingredients that you probably already have around your house. I'm using a recipe from a woman named Hannah Glass. She published a cookbook in England in the 18th century called The Art of Cookery. And the 1774 edition, which you can find digitized online, has a recipe for gingerbread cakes. So let's take a look at the ingredients we'll be using today. So here are all the ingredients we're going to use today. And first I'm going to read you Hannah Glass's recipe, which sounds a little complicated, but we're going to break it down into each of its steps and parts. She says, take 3 pounds of flour, 1 pound of sugar, 1 pound of butter rubbed in very fine, 2 ounces of ginger beat fine, a large nutmeg grated. Then take a pound of treacle, 1/4 of a pint of cream, and make them warm together, and make up the bread stiff. Roll it out, and make it up into thin cakes. Cut them out with a teacup or a small glass, or roll them round like nuts, and bake them on tin plates in a slack oven. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't necessarily need a whole recipe of Hannah Glass's gingerbread, so instead I've made a half batch, and I've broken down all the ingredients we're going to need. So you need 1.5 pounds of flour, which is about 4 cups if you don't have a kitchen scale. You're going to need 1/2 pound of sugar, about a cup. You're going to need 1/2 pound of butter, so about 2 sticks, I guess. You're going to need 1 ounce of ginger, quite a bit, about 4 tablespoons, and 1/2 of a large nutmeg grated, which is about a teaspoon of ground nutmeg, like you'll see in the spice aisle. You're going to need 1/2 pound of treacle. Treacle is just molasses. And 1/2 pound of molasses is about 3/4 of a cup. And you'll need 1/4 cup of cream. So Hannah Glass tells us to take the treacle, the molasses, and the cream and make them warm together. So we're going to put our molasses, which is my favorite ingredient, into a little pot along with the cream. And we're going to put this just over a really low burner while we work on the flour and the sugar. This is going to help the cream and the molasses blend together, and it's going to be the liquid that we use in the dough. So she also says to take the flour and the sugar and the butter and rub in very fine. So rub in is not a phrase that we might have seen in cookbooks today, but what it basically means is to cut the butter and then literally rub it into the mixture so that it forms tiny little balls of dough. And you can do this with a spoon or with your fingers until it becomes kind of grainy, so the butter is broken down and starting to moisturize the flour and the sugar. And just for fun, I think we're going to go into our favorite time-lapse mode now so you can see how it changes over time. So rubbing the butter in fine didn't take very long, just a couple minutes, and you can see it's now got a pretty fine, pebbly grain. But I realized I need a bigger bowl, so I'm going to dump it into this big guy. Add the ginger and the nutmeg. Mix them in really well. Make sure they're distributed all over the place. And then I'm going to take my treacle and cream, which has been warming over low heat this whole time. Not simmering, not boiling, just getting warm. And I'm going to pour it in. Look at that, that looks delicious. Could just drink that like coffee. You want to make sure you distribute this all over because there's not a lot of liquid in this dough. So I want to make sure we spread it all around, hydrate all the flour that's in there. It says make up the bread stiff. So it's not going to be a wet dough, it's going to be sturdy. If you want to get your hands back into this, as long as they're still clean, this would be prime opportunity. So I think that's what I'm going to do. So I've worked the dough about as much as I can, but I was skeptical, and Nicole, who's holding the camera, who's a better baker than I am, was also skeptical. We almost added more liquid or cream to this because it seems a little too crumbly. But I'm glad we gave it a try, part of this experimental archaeology that we talk about sometimes at the museum. Because if you take a chunk of this, make it into a little snowball kind of, put it on a floured work surface, and roll it out, it does actually make a thin dough, just like Hannah Glass says. And you're going to lose some crumbs around the side, but you can just put those back in and make them into the next ball of dough. Now this is the point where if you were Christopher Ludwig, you would use that cookie mold to press a shape into the dough. Or, like Hannah Glass says, you can just use a teacup or the top of a glass or a cookie cutter to make your cake. She also says that if you don't like cakes, you can roll them into nuts. And what that means, just like you might have done when making regular cookies, is to roll a ball of dough, however the size that you want, and then plop that down on the pan. So we're going to make our dough into either nuts or cakes, put them on our pan so they can head into our slack oven. These are a little fragile, so it might be a good idea to get them off with a spatula or something flat. Slide them onto the pan, make up as many as you can out of your dough. So I'm going to make up a couple tin pans worth of these, or a couple baking sheets worth of these, and put them into my oven. A slack oven was a cool oven versus a fast oven, which was a hot oven. So I've set ours at 250 degrees. And just like most recipes in the 18th century, Hannah Glass doesn't tell us how long to bake these, so we've got to pay attention. So once we've got a couple pans worth of these cakes, we'll put them in the oven and see how long it takes to bake them. So I made both types of gingerbread cakes that Hannah Glass suggested. I cut some out with a teacup, these ones that look like big ginger snaps, and I rolled some round like nuts in the way that she suggested. I don't really know what kind of nuts she was talking about, so some of these are big, like walnuts maybe, and some are small. Just kind of an experiment to see what works better. These might look a little bit more like you're used to doing with cookie dough. Now I'm going to put them into my 250 degree oven, and depending on where you put them in your oven, if they're on the top rack or the bottom rack, which side of the pan is facing the front, they're going to cook at different speeds. So from now on, I want you to keep a close eye on these. Check on them every few minutes even, and I'm going to do the same thing, and then when I'm done, I'll try to give you a pointer on just how long it takes to make Hannah Glass's gingerbread cakes. So our cakes are fresh out of the oven. It took us about an hour to get them chewy, about an hour and 20 minutes maybe to be fully baked. You could leave them in for a little longer. You might also turn the heat up a little bit and see if that cooks them a little faster for you. So I would say this has been a pretty successful project. Make sure you check out Christopher Ludwig's original cookie board on our website. And you know, gingerbread would have been a special treat for continental soldiers used to just plain hard bread. But I'm lucky today that I have this whole plate all to myself.